Hey friends, welcome to Yoga Off the Mat. I'm your host, Divya. November marked 5 years since I became a yoga teacher. I actually just recently came back to New York after teaching a weekend of a yoga philosophy module for the studio that trained me. It was such a full circle moment for me and reaffirmed in me a reverence for this incredible practice and lineage. Still, hearing how recently I was certified might shock some of you who've heard me tell the story of how I started practicing yoga over 20 years ago now. I indeed waited 15 years to step into the seat of being a teacher. And there's a good reason for that, which honestly, more of you should consider. In recent years, there's been a massive but strangely quiet revolution happening in the yoga industry, and not nearly enough people are talking about it. So let's talk about it. The yoga teacher training. Some love it, some hate it, some monetize it, some question it, but either way, it exists. Yoga teacher trainings have evolved considerably with the yoga boom in the West, going from a tradition-based passing down of knowledge to a get-rich-quick scam in the name of wellness. Here's what's wrong with modern-day yoga teacher trainings. These days, it's far more common to see trainings that spoon-feed trainees equations on how to teach asana to the masses, sterilize the curriculum of any spiritual inquiry, and conveniently leave out the historical context of this practice. They also repeatedly fail to give you the frameworks of how to apply the non-physical aspects of this practice, such as the philosophy. It is infuriatingly rare to see yoga teacher training programs which actually give trainees a deeper understanding of yoga philosophy and a deeper inquiry into yoga's roots, and help them cultivate their own unique teaching style that evangelizes the benefits of yoga in its entirety, not just one part. The modern day yoga teacher training is here to stay, but it doesn't have to stay this way. In this episode, I'm going to share all about the origins of yoga teacher training, where we went wrong, and what you should look for when you're looking for a yoga teacher training. If you're considering signing up for a yoga teacher training, watch this first. As a concept, as a process, yoga is almost imperceivably ancient. It's fair game to say it's existed for as long as life has. In early texts like the Upanishads, yoga is regarded more holistically as a state of being and less so as a practice that you show up for, making it harder to access for just anybody. It was only formalized as the 8-limbed path known as Ashtanga Yoga within the context of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali around the 2nd century BC. As per many indigenous customs, yogic knowledge was primarily codified through verbal and written traditions, but it was notably passed down through what's known as the Guru-Shishya Parampara, or the teacher-student relationship. In Sanskrit, Guru means teacher, Shishya means student, and Parampara means tradition. Although we might liken this visually to a teacher standing in front of a chalkboard, writing things down, and a student furiously writing everything down in a notebook, it's not actually that simplistic and one-dimensional. The Guru-Shishya relationship is far more intertwined. Generally speaking, the student would live with the teacher in what's known as a Gurukul, or a school. And oftentimes, the Gurukul is actually the home of the teacher. In other cases, it's more of a communal learning center where the students would live and learn. It's almost like a boarding school, but more similar to an ashram or a dojo. The student would be completely immersed in yogic tradition, learning everything from asana to pranayama to meditation, all of it. Students would also learn from philosophical lectures and be taught the importance of adjacent practices such as seva, or service to others. It wasn't just the Raja Yoga path or the 8-limbed path that was taught to students, but also Jnana Yoga or wisdom, Karma Yoga meaning action, and Bhakti Yoga meaning devotion and surrender. Obviously, having not been there myself, I can't describe to you the exact conditions or the structures that existed, but generally that's how it would be. Students would live there until their late teens or early 20s and then graduate, so to speak, and leave the Gurukul and return to normal life. It was the most immersive training you could possibly imagine, requiring a deep, deep commitment and a sacrifice of not only the students' time, but also their ego and their worldly desires. Now, most of us will never go through something quite like that in our lifetime, especially not in the context of a yoga teacher training, even if we didn't evolve to have a fraction of the attention span of our ancestors. And that's no shade, that's just a byproduct of modern living conditions. Our living conditions, economies, and societal structures don't lend themselves to this kind of long-term immersive study. Although yogic knowledge had already been making its way to the West for quite some time, when Swami Vivekananda came to America in the 1800s, it changed the landscape of yoga for good. In evangelizing this incredible practice, he turned yoga into a movement that took the West by storm. Early adopters of yoga quickly realized the multifaceted benefits of this practice, ranging from heightened self-awareness and spiritual intuition to better emotional regulation and stress management, and of course, improved fitness and physiological health, among many, many benefits. Yoga was spreading at a time where fitness and wellness were already booming trends in the West. Forms of group fitness like Pilates, aerobics, and dance were already spreading like wildfire in studio and gym environments, and even digitally on tapes, making fitness convenient and focused on tangible, perceivable results. Yoga, when it was first introduced, was still seen as sort of an unreliable pseudoscience. And teachers such as Swami Vivekananda and Sri Yogendra established more credibility to yoga as a holistic practice. They did this by shedding a more pragmatic, almost scientific lens on yoga, making it more palatable to the Western audience, who weren't as comfortable with the spiritual implications of the holistic practice. So therefore, asana, just one limb of the 8-limb path, became synonymous with yoga, and the rest was history. Students around the US began attending yoga classes and conventions with fervor, and the business opportunity practically wrote itself. There was a cult-like fervor that gripped the nation, as students en masse eagerly sought out teachers who had a devout following. There was simply so much money to be made by turning an inwardly focused, immaterial practice into one that now required a membership, a place of practice, and accessories. Not only was there plenty of money to be made from students who just wanted to feel like they were part of a collective, but there was also an opportunity to scale the industry quickly by developing a program to churn out teachers like a factory. In the 70s, another key yoga leader, Swami Satchidananda, began dispatching yoga students to teach in places like prisons and rehabilitation centers. Later in '99, a new organization by the name of the Yoga Alliance established the first formal yoga teacher training program. They standardized the requirements to train someone to become a teacher at the Western form of a gurukul, the yoga studio. It emphasized the basic understanding of anatomy, teaching cues, common postures, and some philosophical knowledge. By the 2000s, the message of yoga spread far and wide, and studios started to pop up all over the world. However, with the onset and growth of digital platforms that made classes more accessible to students, studios began to struggle financially. They became unable to pay teachers fair wages and oftentimes had to shut down completely when the economies of scale began to break. This is about the time when we start to see yoga studios pushing teacher trainings as an opportunity to compensate for that loss of income, basically to make money quickly. I understand this is a very heavily contested topic, and it's a moral gray area for me too personally. As a teacher myself, even as one of South Asian origin, I had to jump through so many hoops to become a certified yoga teacher, just in order to feel legitimate enough and qualified enough to teach. However, I know that I took enough time as a student of this lineage before even considering to become a teacher or a guide. Where the yoga teacher training model begins to break is when you see them pressuring newer students, meaning they're new to the practice of yoga entirely, who are simply curious to learn about the lineage of yoga, or even just dive deeper into their practice, to sign up for the substantial financial commitment that is yoga teacher training. These training programs can range on the cheaper side, around $1,000, to upwards of $5,000, and even much more for a 200-hour teacher training. Students also aren't being fully vetted before they enter the program. And yes, I'm saying vetted because intentions matter. Too many people are entering this field as a way to make a quick buck, ready to just eat up whatever scripted teaching cues they're being fed in a training and regurgitate it once they're at the front of a class. I've seen way too many trainings that encourage students en masse to sign up for a training before they're really ready to become a yoga teacher. And by the way, this includes trainings led by people of all ethnic backgrounds. Whenever I share this sentiment, there are usually some people who don't know me very well at all who pop up and say that I am acting as a self-appointed gatekeeper of yoga. I used to really refute that title, but you know what? Maybe I am gatekeeping a little bit, and maybe that's okay. I have experimented and mystery shopped at more yoga studios than I can count, observing the depth and authenticity of a yoga teacher's material and poking holes in it. In a class, I'll hear teachers refer to things like dharma and mudra or meditation, but when I go ask clarifying questions, even really basic ones, their eyes almost immediately glaze over and they start using wellness buzzwords just to fill the space. The illusion breaks and they can no longer relate what they were saying back to what they were spewing just a few minutes earlier. This is the problem with yoga teacher training. I'm not saying it shouldn't exist. It seems to be a net positive that more people of different backgrounds are able to become a teacher and reach more communities to spread this healing knowledge, which is a good thing. However, yoga teacher training curriculums need to be better regulated, and students need to be vetted properly for experience and intention before being admitted to a training program. There needs to be better ethical upkeep of the yoga teacher training curriculum all around the world. That being said, if you are considering signing up for a yoga teacher training, here are some key considerations I encourage you to sit with before making that decision. Grab a journal and a pen and let's get into it. Before signing up for yoga teacher training, ask yourself a few simple questions. First, what is your current relationship with yoga? Meaning, is it something you practice casually? How long have you practiced for? What is the depth of your experience with yoga? Have you practiced other limbs of Ashtanga yoga outside of asana? Have you heard about or even looked into some of the other styles of yoga entirely? Is your practice restricted to a studio class setting, or have you tried practicing in solitude on your own? Second, how did you even come across the idea of a yoga teacher training? Was it sold to you by studio management, or were you looped in by a friend who just wants company? Have you already taken measures to learn about yoga outside of a teacher training context? What is your idea of what a yoga teacher training consists of? What are you hoping for or expecting from a yoga teacher training? If you found it on your own, what made you want to look it up in the first place? And third, what are your intentions? Why do you want to go through this training? Is there anything in particular that you want to learn more about? And why do you want to learn about it? What do you plan to do after the training? If you plan to teach, why do you want to walk that path? If you could teach yoga and not earn a single cent from it, would you still do it? All these questions are barely scratching the surface, but they're a great way to start a line of inquiry within yourself. They might be difficult to sit with, but they're only here to establish the integrity of your intentions and determine your purpose with yoga. These questions can be confronting and even offending, based on how much your ego might be obscuring your humility. But if you're exploring this path for the right reasons, you'll accept the discomfort and open yourself up to this inquiry anyway. Now, let's say you've gone deep into yourself and really thought about why you want to do this training. And it feels right and ethical to move forward, meaning you're motivated by more than recognition, money, or opportunity. And you fully understand that completing this training is still barely scratching the surface, and that even upon graduating, you're only at the precipice of embarking on a lifelong journey of learning all there is to know about yoga. If you're still standing strong after all of that, here are some criteria that I strongly encourage you to look out for when you are researching yoga teacher trainings. First, research whether the company that's providing the training is part of a mega chain that has unethical business practices. I don't mean to say that mega chains are automatically unethical, but they do historically lend themselves to problematic business practices. Here's what to look out for. Do they pay their teachers fair wages? Do they regularly demand additional unpaid labor? Find out if this company prioritizes DE&I policies at the employment and programmatic levels. Do they have any history of discrimination, racism, whitewashing, etc.? Second, who's on their teacher roster? There should be teachers with a range of specialties and expertise. People coming from different schools of thought, different lineages, different teaching styles, and there should be a range of representation. Third, look at the training program structure. What is the ratio of teachers to students? Will there be enough opportunity for you to have discussion groups, ask questions, talk to other students? Is there a blend of theory and practical? Is there a service or giving back component? Will it be virtual, in person, or a hybrid of the two? Ideally, it should be in person or a hybrid because yoga is an energetic practice. As a continuation of the ancient Guru-Shishya tradition, there should be some of that in-person student-teacher relationship. It's okay if it's virtual, we live in a different time, but just know you won't be getting the same quality of training, and that's simply a fact. Moving on, what's the length of the program? For the sake of this discussion, we'll focus on the 200-hour training. Some travel trainings will get a 200-hour certification done in a month, and sometimes even 2 weeks, which is ridiculous. Even if it's an all-day, everyday kind of training, it is unsustainable and it is ineffective as a way to teach people new skills and knowledge. At a certain point, they would just be throwing things at the wall, hoping it sticks. The training should be a minimum of 2 months, spread out enough that the students have enough time to marinate on and retain the information they're learning, and committed to memory through a combination of discussion, practice, and reflection. Fourth, one of the most important factors to consider, the curriculum. A solid yoga teacher training should cover, at minimum, in depth the 8-limbed path of yoga known as Ashtanga Yoga. To lay it out, this is the yamas and niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Ideally, it also covers the broader universe of yoga, which I alluded to in the earlier segment of this podcast, but you can also refer to my earlier episode called The 4 Types of Yoga That Most People Don't Know About. An equal amount of time should be spent learning yoga philosophy, as it is on asana-based modules such as cueing workshops, posture clinics, and styles of asana. The history of yoga should be covered along with the misappropriation and commercialization of this lineage. You should be shown clear examples of what it looks like when yoga is taught incorrectly, and yes, that's possible. But the point here is that you should spend a significant amount of time covering the philosophy and applying it firsthand during your training. Some of the concepts are understandably complicated, and in order for them to stick, you need time and repetition. You should be referring to texts such as the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita, which beautifully identify and demonstrate the various and vast applications of yoga. The yogic tradition has been intertwined with some South Asian religions, but at the end of the day, yoga is an agnostic, spiritual, energetic practice available to people of any faith. Too many trainings sterilize yoga of its innate spirituality, simply because they equate spirituality with religion the same way that asana is used synonymously with yoga. It's very limiting. Now, speaking of asana, here's what you need to think about. Are you taught how to use inclusive language when you cue postures? There also shouldn't be hierarchies of postures, using language such as beginner, advanced, full expression of the posture, things like that. There should be a focus on teaching the anatomy and physiological elements of common poses and sequences, but you should also be taught the mechanics of posture variations. Props such as blocks, bolsters, and straps should be a regular part of your asana training, and they're not the exception to the rule. There should be no negative stigma around it, point blank period. Now, postural adjustment is more of a modern creation. It's not a remnant of this practice, historically speaking, but rather a new, more therapeutic method of teaching people. But it's not necessary. If your program includes training on how to make postural adjustments, please ensure you do not practice it as a default, and especially without asking and getting prior consent from your students. And teaching style. A good teacher training focuses more on equipping you with all the basics of yoga philosophy and movement, and provides you with frameworks to not only understand it better, but to interpret and disseminate this knowledge to others, to people of all backgrounds, making it accessible. As a yoga teacher, your confidence will come from knowledge and experience, not from memorization, and certainly not by mimicking anybody else. That being said, if you're in a yoga teacher that simply gives you a handbook with literal equations on how to cue, pause before you proceed. Ring the alarm. It just means that the road to discovering your own voice as a yoga teacher will be so much longer. When you're actually in front of a class, you're going to be so much more focused on regurgitating those equations and remembering these lines, which means you lose out on the magic of being present with your students and showing up for them in the way that they need you to. And last, but certainly not least, decolonizing yoga. It's important that your yoga teacher training covers the history of yoga, but it's just as critical that they focus on the future of yoga. And you are part of the future of yoga. Decolonization is such a buzzword these days and can be taken out of context. I'm gonna let you in on a secret that no one tells you about yoga teacher trainings. As a teacher, you have a responsibility to preserve this lineage. That is what you're signing up for. You're not signing up to help people lose weight. You're not here to help people become more flexible. You're not even here to help them get in touch with their inner self. You are ultimately becoming an active participant in the lineage of yoga. Remember what I said about how yoga was passed down through verbal tradition? You're now part of that tradition. Listen, even I have to accept that yoga has evolved to fit modern times. I'm confident that yoga is fluid enough to adapt to the times and that it was intended to be that way. But that doesn't mean that we have free reign to call anything we want yoga. Things that are seemingly trivial, like putting a sacred symbol on flip-flops, or even worse, fabricating classes like beer yoga, outright examples of appropriation, are actually incredibly harmful. Decolonization should be an innate segment of yoga teacher training. It should just automatically be there. You have a duty to speak up when you see examples of appropriation in the wild. You have a responsibility to protect yoga's integrity. I'll leave you with this. A huge red flag in yoga teacher training is a curriculum devoid of any of the original yogic texts. A huge red flag in yoga teacher training is if they feed you equations and scripts on how to teach postures. A huge red flag in yoga teacher training is if they strip away the spirituality and teach yoga like exercise. Remember, it is an incredible honor to become a steward of the brilliant, ancient technology that is yoga. But not everyone needs to walk the path of a teacher. If you just want to teach, you can teach so many different types of movement. Teaching yoga is so much more than the 60 minutes most people spend on a mat a few times a week. If you simply want to learn more about yoga, just read more books about it. Sign up for workshops or lectures. I mean, not to plug myself, but this podcast was created for this exact reason, to help people learn more about yoga in an approachable, accessible way without feeling intimidated by all there is to know about it. 20 years into my practice, I still feel like I'm just starting my journey. There is so much to learn and relearn and apply, and you simply cannot limit yourself. Yoga teacher training should be a choice, not a default. Please refer to the reflection questions and the training program criteria that I shared with you. And weigh your options with the utmost sincerity and patience before making a decision. I share this with you as someone who practiced yoga for 15 years on my own, by myself on a mat, before I even considered becoming a yoga teacher. And when I did decide to sign up for a yoga teacher training, I didn't go with the most popular or convenient option. I took my time, did my research, and even regularly visited and practiced with the studio where I ended up training. I reviewed their curriculum and observed the dynamics and the demographics of their business and their students, meeting with the owner and the teachers for quite some time. And only after I fully vetted them did I move forward with complete confidence. I've even come full circle to teaching with them multiple times and even leading a weekend module on yoga philosophy just this fall. And to this day, I am so happy with that decision. I can't tell you how many peers I have who did training programs with mega chains because it was convenient and have regretted their decision ever since because of the unethical business practices, because of their faulty training that left more questions than answers. And because they have seen how yoga has evolved and how much more there is to it, and they feel like they didn't get the most out of it. We'll wrap up here. I know you probably have a lot to sit with. Just remember to leave a comment or reach out and ask me questions if you have any, or if you need help weighing different options for teacher training. I'm here to help you. If you enjoyed this episode and look forward to more, consider supporting my work by joining my Patreon, patreon.com/Divya Bala. Make sure you follow Yoga Off the Mat on your podcast platform of choice, on Instagram at Yoga Off the Mat Podcast, and on YouTube at Divya Bala. Thanks for listening. It's time to get off your mat and do some yoga.